Hey guys, welcome back to the Eerie Side Podcast with your hosts, Elena,
Sophia,
and Dee.
We really appreciate you guys listening, and I hope you're ready to get on the Eerie Side. So before we get into this episode, we would appreciate it if you guys could give the podcast a follow. Make sure the bell notification is turned on so you'll be notified whenever we drop an episode every Thursday. If you enjoyed the show, we would love to have you leave us a review. And if there's like a case suggestion or any feedback you'd like to share, feel free to send us a message in the text box below. And then share the podcast with family, friends, coworkers, or really anyone you think will enjoy it. And please follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Thank you. All right, guys. So are we ready to get into the episode today?
Yep. Sure.
All right. So today I'm going to be talking about the Villisca axe murders. Do we know anything about this case?
I think so. Did that happen in a cabin?
No, it was a house.
I'm pretty sure I've heard it. So when you go through, I'll let you know if it's familiar or not.
I'm not sure I have.
All right. So this takes place in Villisca, Iowa on the night of June 9th to the morning of June 10th, 1912.
So, I think I know this one.
Yeah, so it's a bit of an older case.
That's what made me realize it was old.
Are you thinking of the Hinterkaifeck murders?
Well, that one happened in Europe, right?
That was a different one.
I also know those.
Yeah. This one's also similar, and funny enough, I do mention the Hinterkaifeck murders here. So, before I get into this case, I would like to say, I feel like this is a case that you guys are really going to enjoy in the sense that it is going to really twist your brains. Like, it's going to make you think, it's going to make you question things. I hope to throw you guys on your asses today.
I've been thrown on my ass a lot lately.
I'll see if you're capable of that. You can try.
We'll see. All right. In the early hours of June 10th, someone broke into the Moore family home where they brutally killed the whole family plus 2 additional children that were staying the night. In the house was the father, 43-year-old Josiah Joe Moore, his wife, 39-year-old Sarah Moore, and their 4 children, Herman, 11, Catherine, 10, Boyd, 7, and Paul, 5. In addition to the family in the house that night were 2 of Catherine's friends, Lena Stillinger, age 12, and Ina Stillinger, age 8. Now, in order to get a better picture of everything, I'm going to retrace the family's steps on the night of June 9th. So, on June 9th, there was a Christian's Day service at the Presbyterian Church, which was an end-of-the-year kind of thing for the Sunday school program. Sarah, the wife, was actually a co-director of this event. So Josiah and Sarah took their children, and the Stillinger girls were already there to their Children's Day service, where the Moore children performed. And the Stillinger girls, I'm pretty sure, but I don't quote me on that. The Stillingers were neighbors with the Moores, and they were actually planning on walking over to their grandmother's house that night, but they didn't want to walk alone to their grandma's house at night. So they ended up going with the Moores to have a sleepover with them, which is why they left with them.
Wait, they were going to go to their grandmother's house, but their parents prevented them from going to see their grandmother because of the walk they felt was too unsafe?
No. So they were going to go to the grandmother's after the church, but the girls didn't want to walk home late at night. So they were like, can we have a sleepover? And actually, I think Joe called the Stillingers' house to say, can they have a sleepover? And I think their older sister, because Ina and Lena are the younger 2, so I think the oldest one was said, yeah, that should be fine.
It's interesting to think of people from the early 1900s having sleepovers.
Yeah, and what's so interesting is Lena is 12, Ina's 8, and Catherine's 10, so they're a little bit older and younger, but they're all really close, or they're all friends at least. I don't know how close, but close enough to have a sleepover. So the service ended around 9:30 p.m. Now, remember the service because it is important later. And the Moores walked 3 blocks back to their home It's expected that they got back home around like 9:45, 10 p.m.-ish, and given it's late, it's most likely assumed that the family went to bed pretty soon after coming home. They also live in a farmhouse, so it's in 1912. They're going to go to bed pretty early because they do have to wake up early the next day for all their animals and stuff on the farm. And at some point after midnight, the killer or killers entered the house, most likely through the back door. However, some do theorize that the killer might have already been in the house and was in the attic because there was a couple of cigarette butts found in there, but some people don't think that's related, or that maybe someone could have just had some cigarettes up there. But however they enter the house, the killer made sure to grab Josiah's axe from the backyard first. Now, according to the coroner, when he first entered the house, the killer took an oil lamp from one of the dressers and removed the chimney, which I believe is like the top glass part. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Those old oil lamps with the glass on top. Yeah. So essentially he took the glass part off, like the chimney, and I guess he put it under like a chair or dresser, different depending on the sources. He then bent or split the wick to make the flame smaller, and he lit it. So he did this as a way to just make the light smaller and dimmer.
So he still had some light in the attic.
Exactly. And keep in mind, this is 1912, so everything is like pitch black in this house. And
Excuse me, this is in the attic that he did the light?
no, this is downstairs, like when he first walked in.
I thought he was in the attic.
No. Some people theorize that he was already in the attic,
Oh, okay.
but most people think that he came into the house after everyone was asleep. There are some people that claim, well, there was some like cigarette butts in the attic, so maybe he could have already been waiting there. But
Excuse me, did you say where this was happening?
Iowa, right?
yeah,
Oh, Iowa. That's
Villisca,
right.
Iowa.
Okay.
And so he took off like that top glass part. He bent the wick, making it smaller. And then he went past the downstairs guest bedroom where the Stillinger girls were sleeping and went straight to Josiah. He entered Josiah and Sarah's room, where he first struck Josiah in the head with the flat end of the blade, so like the butt end of the blade, killing him instantly. After he hit Josiah, it's believed
I'm surprised that just one strike from the flat end of the blade would kill him.
honestly, when you think about it, it's not that surprising because it's like this blade is like, it's a piece of metal. It's really thick. And it's hard enough that it could easily crack a skull when you think about it. 'Cause it's like someone taking metal and just bashing someone's head in.
Interesting. I guess all it took was just one hit, though, to actually kill him.
So after he hit Josiah, it's believed that he then hit Sarah before she even woke up or knew anything that was going on, which to me is also crazy. Like that you can be sleeping next to someone and they get murdered and you don't even know.
Yeah.
That's chilling. Afterwards, the killer went into the next room where the 4 more children were. He killed all 4 children where they slept, somehow not waking any of the other siblings in the room up or even the 2 friends downstairs. Then the killer eventually went back to the parents' room to hit Josiah even more. He then eventually went downstairs and killed Lena and Ina. Then the killer went back to the parents' room to hit Josiah even more. Now, this was determined by, which is actually kind of interesting forensics given the year. It's 1912, so props to them. But there was a shoe, and they determined that the killer went back to Josiah with like a shoe that was pooling with blood after Josiah was first killed. And then when the killer went back to the room, he knocked that shoe over in the blood. So basically there's like that shoe that filled up with blood. And then when Josiah was first killed, and then it filled up and was knocked over later so that when the killer came back. So that's how they determined that he went back to continue bashing in their skulls.
Do they know why he did that?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, overkill, and you can, maybe Josiah really was their target of the rage. We don't know. It's just, he could have really wanted to do that all along, but he had to get everyone like in the house dead before he can really take the time to bash their skulls. And I'll get into a little bit of that more later.
He only went back for the father, correct?
Actually, he went back for everyone.
He went back and re-hit everybody?
Yeah. And I do get into that a little bit more that later on. But also, like I said, the killer did go downstairs for Lena and Ina, where they killed them with the butt end of the axe. Now, what's interesting here is it seems that Lena was the only one who possibly woke up. Lena was the last one killed. I will get into more of why they think she didn't. but for a while it was assumed that Lena could have possibly been the only one that woke up that night. Also, one important thing to note is that the majority of the blood, obviously there was a lot of blood from their heads being bashed in, but it was mainly centered around the head and the pillow of their beds because he didn't really attack anywhere else, so the majority of the blood was found around the head. Around 7:30-ish a.m. on the next day, so June 10th, the neighbor, Mary Peckham, noticed that the family wasn't around, doing chores, feeding chicken, kids playing, etc., which was unusual, so she lets the chickens out and eventually calls Joe's brother, Ross. Now, I do want to point out that this is 1912. People don't lock their drawers or, stuff like that. So that was a little odd for her. So Ross called Joe's business, and the employee who answered also had no idea where Joe was because he was supposed to be at work hours ago. Ross came around about 8 a.m., and he looked around, and he tried to open up the door. I don't think he had a key per se to Joe's house. I've heard different things. He did eventually open up the door with a key, but I think what happened was the keys back then, it wasn't very specific which key you had to open the doors because the locks weren't that advanced. He didn't have a key, but then he was like, you know what? I have a key that's kind of similar. Maybe I can use this key to open up their door. And that's what he did. Because I hear different things that he had a key but if he did, why was he spending time going around the house, knocking on the doors, looking through the windows, all that stuff.
That's interesting.
So he was able to open the door and he walked in. It was completely black, but he saw 2 bodies covered with a sheet with blood on it. He saw the blood on the walls and the smell of death, and he immediately got out of the house where he called someone to get the marshal, Henry or Hank Horton. Hank had arrived around 8:30 a.m. and went into the house. When he came out, he said, quote, somebody was murdered in every bed. He also said that no one should be allowed in, but in a town like this, it's pretty hard to do. After Horton left, he went and got Dr. J. Clark Cooper, Dr. Hugh, Dr. F.S. Williams, who examined the bodies, and Reverend Ewing, who was the Moore's Reverend. And this was all around 8:40 a.m. And then eventually Dr. Lindquist, the county coroner, came shortly after. It was at this time that people started to crowd around the house. The news spread fast, and it was bad. Lena and Ina's mother was calling the house for a while, trying to get a hold of anyone, figure out where their daughters are, when are they going to come home, or if they'll be home in time for school, all that stuff. She called, and this is 1912, so she got the operator, and she's like, can you connect me to the Moore's house? And the operator told her, that everyone in that house was dead.
Oh my gosh.
News spread fast, horrible way to hear.
I wonder if she even believed it, because I would be like, there's how many people?
There's 8 people.
Yeah, I would have been like, I don't think
I think
possible.
you're confused. Yeah, I would have a hard time believing that too. But Horton and it was 3-4 doctors all were in the house trying to piece together what happened. What they found were that all the victims were found with their heads covered with various bedclothes and were all found in their beds where they slept. All of their skulls were bashed in about 20 to 30 times, and they were hit with such force that the parents' and the children's rooms had gouge marks on the walls from the upward swing of the axe. He was hitting them with the butt end, so when he would swing up, the sharp end would hit the ceiling, and it would go back down.
He would actually hit the ceiling?
Yeah.
He must have done that after everyone was dead. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And that's also confusing for people, because if he was hitting the ceiling, how is everyone not waking up? Okay, well, they're probably already dead by this point. But he did kind of later on, when he was going back, he was starting to use, and I'll get into this later, but he was starting to use the sharp end too. So it is a little confusing as to when he started to use the sharp end and the butt end and how no one was awoken. But they're thinking that these gouge marks came after everyone was dead.
How tall do they think the individual was, since he was able to hit the ceiling?
Well, actually, that's interesting that you say that, because they thought that the person was pretty short, because it's an old home, so I guess the ceilings weren't too high. So if the person was taller, he would actually have a hard time hitting the ceiling.
Oh, that's interesting.
So they actually think he was more on the shorter side.
So he hit each of them 20 to 30 times?
Yeah.
That's a lot of extra.
Yeah, it's a lot of physical
exertion.
Yeah, exactly. So definitely had a lot of anger.
I also think that must be exhausting too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. So
Not if you're young.
True. True. But the coroner did say that the person who swung the axe was left-handed or swung the axe with his left hand. And Josiah and Sarah's heads were just completely bashed in. Josiah's was unrecognizable. Sarah's, I heard, was a little bit more recognizable because it was almost like the person came back and like sliced her head with the sharp end and it was like slicing off like her head in like pieces.
Ew.
It was pretty bad. So
Did they actually like were trying to slice it, or was just like their anger and rage how it came out?
I don't know. I mean, I've heard different things. I've heard people compare it to like bash, almost like weird medical treatment. Like it's like they're trying to, but they don't have any medical experience. So it was almost like they were trying to smash their brain. I don't know.
I don't understand. This individual should somehow be walking around town with a lot of blood on him.
Yep. But
I mean, 8 people, 30 times each.
Yeah.
Or 20 to 30.
This happened in the middle of the night.
It did happen in the middle of the night. Also, it is worth mentioning that there was some dispute with the town and the lighting, like of the lampposts outside. And I guess the light company or something was like, you know what, screw this, you guys are being ridiculous, we're shutting off all the lights. So all the lights in the town, like from the lampposts and stuff, were all off that night.
Just that night?
Just that night, because then everyone was killed, and then they're like, okay, yeah, we'll keep them on.
Wow. And I
So,
wonder if they
yeah.
knew that too.
I mean, that's also no question. It just so coincidentally happened.
Right.
You
That's
don't
what
know.
I'm saying, is that's a very big coincidence.
Right. So like I said, the killer either entered the house or came out of wherever he was hiding and went straight to the parents' room and killed Josiah first, and then Sarah. And they were hit with so much force that Joe's eyes were completely gone. Some people actually suspected at first that the killer could have taken them, but most likely they were just destroyed by the axe. Like they were just pulverized.
Wow.
That kind of gives you a better picture of what's going on and what this person is capable of. It seemed like everyone was mainly killed where they were sleeping and found in the same positions that they were likely sleeping in. Essentially, the killer entered the house, went for Joe and Sarah, killed them with the blunt side of the axe, then went for the 4 children, did the same, then went to kill Lena and Ina, then went back after everyone was dead and axed their heads with the sharp side.
Okay, so this individual appears to have known that the 2 girls who were visiting were there.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree.
He could have passed them and not known if he just happened to pick that family.
Yeah, I don't know if he knew that they were, we'll get into we think he might have known, but it is clear that I think he knew that they were sleeping in that downstairs room because he would most likely have seen them passing by. Even when Joe's brother Ross rocked in and it was still pitch dark and it was just a light from the door, he could still see there was 2 bodies there. So I feel like the killer knew that those 2 girls were there and just went straight for the parents' room.
So he knew where the parents' room was.
Exactly.
Too. That's number 1. Number 2, there's a lot of rage here.
Mm-hmm.
So he's familiar with the house, at least.
It sounds like it, and it's very personal.
Right, exactly. I mean, he went back. So. Josiah had the worst of it.
But do you think it's because he had all the rage towards Josiah, or because he needed to make sure the head of the house, the biggest person, the man, was completely dead?
I mean,
30 times, though?
Yeah, that's the thing. And we'll go into, like, was Josiah really the target, or was there someone else? And if Josiah wasn't the target, why did he have so much done towards his head compared to the others? And he was already dead. His skull was already cracked. He already killed the whole family. Josiah didn't get up. It was clear he was dead.
Was this individual ever married before?
Who's this individual?
The killer?
No, the father.
Yeah, he's married to his wife, Sarah.
No, before.
Oh.
By any chance?
Josiah, you mean?
I don't think so. I think it was just Sarah.
Oh, okay.
So now Lena was found in a bit more of a strange position. And this is why I'm like, well, who was the target, right? So everyone was more or less found exactly how they were sleeping.
Lena is the guest, correct?
Yeah.
And she's also 12 years old?
11.
Oh, she's 11.
Lena is 11 and Ina is 8. Some people say that she might have been like 7. Yeah. Lena's 12. Actually, I lied. You're right. Lena's 12.
Okay, 12.
And Ina is 8, maybe 7.
Lena's friends with, what's her name, Kathy?
Catherine. Lena and Ina are friends with Catherine.
And how is Catherine 12 as well?
Catherine's 10.
10. Oh, okay.
So Herman was the oldest. Herman was 11, Catherine 10, Boyd 7, and Paul 5. Lena, like I said, was found in a strange position. Dr. Williams gave this testimony to a grand jury saying that, quote, she lay as though she had kicked one foot out of her bed sideways with one hand under the pillow on her right side. Half sideways, not clear over, but just a little.
Wait, how did she appear?
Okay, so she was found 1/3 of the way down the bed. She was on her, I believe, her right hip, and she was like kind of turned over, but not completely. So her shoulders were flat, but her hips were kind of turned over.
Could that have also been a reaction? An involuntary from being hit on the head that it caused her bottom half to move?
Most likely not, because one, her underwear had been removed and was tossed under the bed. Her nightgown was pushed up around her waist, exposing her from the waist down. Now, her arm, being above her head, is what most specialists had believed at first was a defensive gesture, kind of to stop the guy. But like saying, she woke up, tried to defend herself. But the pillow was already blood-soaked, and the arm was found on top of the blood, suggesting that she was pulled down and the arm went into the pool of blood. And there was also a bloody spot on her left thigh, like upper thigh, from when the killer pulled her down. And people also first thought that there was a cut on her arm because there was some blood there, but when it was washed, it was clear it wasn't a cut and just a blood stain. So it seems like she was actually killed pretty instantly, and then the killer pulled her down, and she went in that weird position. That arm went up, and then he removed her undergarment and then pulled her dress up. But
she was sexually assaulted?
There was no sign of sexual assault on any of the victims.
How accurate do you think that claim is, considering it's 1912?
I would say it's pretty accurate.
I just don't understand why she would have her underwear taken off and her dress pulled up.
We'll get into a little bit more of how we think where this sexual desire might have been taken out on. But as of right now, they did say that there was no signs of rape or any sexual molestation. The doctors did agree that rape was not a motive, at least there. But it was strange that Lena was the only one found like that. But again, there was no signs that she was raped. But after the killer was done with the murders, he stuck around for a bit to finish his ritual. The bloody axe was left leaning against the wall in the downstairs bedroom, the bedroom where Lena and Ina were in. It had blood and flesh still on it, but it was clear that someone tried to wipe it down, most likely to remove any evidence. All the windows.
What evidence, though? Because it's 1912. They don't have DNA testing.
No, but if they find a fingerprint, they probably could compare it.
Did they have fingerprints in 1912?
They did, because later on I do go into some theories and I do talk about different fingerprints that were already in the system and stuff like that. And there was no fingerprints found at this crime scene.
I wonder when they started fingerprinting. Like, when did that become a thing?
See. They've used it in China as early as 300 BC and in Japan as early as AD 702. So 702. In the United States since 1902. So we've been doing it for pretty early.
I guess it's not that advanced of a...
10 years.
So all the windows and mirrors had various clothes placed over them. And at one point, the killer even ripped Sarah's dress in half and placed them over two reflective surfaces. Anything that, not just mirrors, but anything that was reflective, the killer placed some sort of clothing or something over it, including the windows.
So he doesn't have to see himself.
Exactly. But people also do claim that in this time, people are very, they like to keep in touch, they like to keep up with their traditions. People also do say that back then, there was a tradition of covering up mirrors when someone had died in the house. I think it was like to prevent the mirror from taking the soul or or something like that. People do also say, well, maybe this was just a tradition for him and his family, and that maybe he didn't want to see himself. Maybe it was remorse. You don't know. But there was also a 4-pound, and I've also heard 2-pound, so 4 to 2 pounds, depending on the source. 4-pound slab of uncooked bacon that was wrapped in a towel placed next to the axe. I don't know how people came to this conclusion, but people do speculate that given the fact that it was in Ina's room, that the person used that to masturbate.
The bacon?
Yeah.
It was in their room? No.
It was. They took this bacon out of their fridge or ice box, I think, whatever they had at 1912. And there was still more in the icebox fridge, whatever. They took that bacon out and like wrapped it in like a cloth or something like that. And it was left in the room with Lena and Ina. I don't think there's like evidence to suggest like he 100% did that, but people suspect that that's what it was used for, because what other reason would this person have for bringing this bacon out and leaving it in this room?
And they found semen?
They did not, from what I've gathered.
I don't know if they had the science to say this is definitely semen, but they didn't find anything that suggested it could be.
I don't think so. I mean, it does kind of seem like a reach, because I feel like there probably would have been signs that something happened to it. So I don't know if there was some signs, but there wasn't semen or what, but they do theorize that that's possibly what he could have used it for.
There's two things that come to mind right now. Either it's a very young gentleman who is trying to do his manly thing there and can't because he's too young, and maybe he thought with bacon or some grease or something would help him. I have no idea. However, at the same time, it could be an adult who is trying to get the same high but can't.
It's a piece of ham, you're saying.
Or bacon, technically.
Bacon?
Yeah. No, but I mean, remember how the girls' clothes were pushed but didn't find anything?
Right.
It could be he's trying to get off and for some reason may not be.
Right.
You know, maybe it's the grease he's using from the bacon to get himself excited, like cream or something.
Right, and he can't.
And he can't. It could be that he's trying everything he can because he needs this release, and it's the child, and it's not working.
Right.
Or he did, and he didn't leave anything behind, which I find pretty rare, but...
He could have just used protection, but I feel like... I don't know. I feel like the bacon would have had a lot of evidence, but I don't know. So, yeah. It's also 1912, so they're at a disadvantage. So, there was also a plate of uneaten food that was left on the kitchen table, as well as a bowl of bloody water that people believe he used to clean up, like to wash his hands and stuff. And then, sometime before 5 a.m., he left the house, leaving the lamp at the top of the stairs, locking the doors as he left, taking the keys with him.
Let me see if I get this. There's food left out, and that's from him, they think?
Yeah.
And a bowl of bloody water.
Yeah.
So there were no fingerprints on any of this, especially a bowl of bloody water?
Nope. I'm going to get into...
Whether they did the fingerprint right.
Let me get into that in a minute.
Okay.
So, I can say this now. Although they'd said, like, don't let anyone in this house, up to over 100 people toured this house while the bodies were there. Neighbors, churchgoers, anyone and everyone that wanted to come in and look at it, they could.
Were the bodies still in?
Yep. Someone took a piece of Josiah's skull
Oh my god.
Okay.
from him
That's...
and was like,
Wrong.
I think even bragging about it.
The police did not do their job.
They didn't have much of a police.
Hank Horton, this is Villisca, Iowa. And he doesn't even deal with drunks or bar fights or anything like small. I mean, these people are very out of their element. They've never experienced anything like this ever. So it's hard for them to really know how to deal with it. And apparently people were like, there was one guy tasked with like not letting everyone in, and they would like, people would try and trick him and like sneak around and get in. So like, it was like they were trying, but these people were just way too determined, and they said, don't come in here. You will regret it to the day you die. It's not something you want to see, but people came in, they toured. I'm sure I think they even picked up the axe. Like they destroyed the crime scene.
Obviously no crime scene tape.
Yeah. I mean, even if they did have it, I doubt that would have done anything. There was someone out there telling them, like, do not go in. And they were tricking him and trying to sneak behind. It was this whole thing. Including, this is what Horton and all the doctors are saying. They're like, well, you know what? Let's go out. Let's check around the house. There's a barn there. Let's look into it. So in the barn, there were some hay bales that were stacked in a weird way with an indent on the top, like someone had been sitting or laying there for a while. And next to where that person, would have sat, there was a little hole in the barn that looked towards the whole property and the house. So this person would have been able to look out and to see the house and when everyone went to sleep, if the killer was the one laying on the hay.
Well, that's creepy.
Yeah. So he would have been able to see when the lights went out, when everyone started to go to bed, everything. I'm going to pause here before I get into the investigation and the theories and the suspects. What are your thoughts? What do you think the motive was? Do you believe it was one person, multiple? What are we thinking?
I personally think it's one person. You don't need two people if you can kill them like that in their sleep and they don't even know. The motive, it does sound that it's something to do with the family or something to do sexually. I'm still trying to figure that out. They picked that family, so something is making them go to this family. I don't know if it's the two girls that came over or if it's that family itself with the father.
I don't know. I have no idea. I want to know more about the family's background and what, if they were dealing with any issues with anyone or what was going on in their lives. So I truly don't know if it had anything to do with the family or was it something involving Lena. I just do not know. I think I agree with Mom when she said it's likely one individual.
Right.
Because there's nothing that you've said to me at least that has made me think or shown any evidence towards there being two people.
Exactly. And I would agree with you on that one. And most of these theories are one person or all of them. Onto the investigation, there are actually 6 different names that have been thrown around over the years. So I'm going to dive into all of them. And I'm kind of going to start off with the theories that I find had like the least bit of evidence or weight to them and kind of get into the more meaty ones as I go down.
So you're not talking about suspects. You're talking about theories.
No, I'm talking about suspects. Sorry. I might have said theories.
Okay,
but yeah.
so it's 6 suspects you're going to go through?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I'm going to talk about their motives and everything like that. So first one is Samuel R. Moyer, which is Josiah's brother-in-law, so Sarah's brother. And it was reported that he had threatened to kill Josiah before, but he did have a clear alibi, so he was released and was clear. And then another suspect was Andrew Sawyer, who was a transient who was interrogated, but that was really it. He was obsessed with the case and would always sleep fully clothed, like he was ready to make a getaway if he needed. And he slept with an axe next to him. Now, being obsessed with a murder doesn't always mean that they're guilty, and sleeping with an axe next to him might just seem weird, but in this time, axes were a very common household thing to have, so there wasn't really much more to go off of with him. Now, the next one, we have Frank F. Jones, who lived in Villisca as an Iowa state senator. Now, Josiah actually used to work for Frank for years. Frank and Josiah did not like each other. First off, Frank belonged to the Methodist Church, and Josiah belonged to the Presbyterian Church. The whole town was divided by their religion, whether they believed Frank did this or not. There was also a rumor that Josiah was having an affair with Frank's daughter-in-law, but there was no evidence to prove it. So what is Frank's motive, right? Basically, Josiah did not like how things were at Frank's farm equipment business, so he left. He took a huge John Deere account with him, so he took that away from Frank. And when he started up his own business, given that the power Frank had, it wasn't hard for people to start speculating that he could have paid someone to murder the Moores because he was a state senator and he did have the power of the money. So that kind of brings us to our next suspect, which is Gladson W. Mansfield. Now, some people theorize that Jones hired Mansfield to kill the Moores. During this period, there were numerous other axe killings that resembled the Moores that led people to think that there was a serial killer on the loose.
I was going to say how many other killings are going on with this sort of MO, because this is very
specific
and
yeah.
specific. And if this had been the only one, I would have said that this attacker would have had to been super controlled.
Right.
And it also sounds like he's done it before. The way he has organized this and commits the acts, to me, does not sound like this is his first time.
And knew where Josiah and Sarah were sleeping, or at least knew how to get around a house quietly enough to figure out where they were sleeping. It's definitely interesting.
He had a plan.
Right. So there were similar axe murders in Colorado Springs, Colorado, Ellsworth, and Paola, Kansas, I'm not sure. These cases were very similar and led some to believe that they were committed by the same person. For the Colorado murders, a family was murdered with an axe. Bed sheets covered the windows. The blood was wiped off the axe. The victims' heads were covered with bedclothes. As for the Kansas murders, there was one detective at the Burns Detective Agency of Kansas City, Detective James Newton Wilkerson. That is actually a really cool name. Wilkerson believed that Mansfield was a coke-addicted serial killer. Wilkerson also thought Mansfield was responsible for killing his own family in Blue Island, Illinois on July 15th, 1914. Mansfield's wife, infant child, father, and mother-in-law were all murdered with axes 2 years after the Villisca murders. Wilkerson also believed that Mansfield was responsible for the murders in Paola, Kansas, and another murder in Aurora, Illinois, in addition to the Villisca murders. According to Wilkerson's, all the murders were very similar, which he believed meant that the same person committed them. All the murders were committed with an axe, mirrors covered, lamps with the chimney removed, and a basin for the murderer to wash their hands. The murderer didn't leave any fingerprints, which made sense for Wilkerson since Mansfield's prints were in the system. In 1916, Wilkerson convinced a grand jury to investigate Mansfield, and he was eventually arrested. However, Mansfield payroll records provided him with an airtight alibi that showed that he was in Illinois when the Villisca murders took place. He was eventually released due to lack of evidence. However, there was a witness that claimed to have seen Mansfield in Iowa at the time of the murder. A restaurant owner from Shenandoah, Iowa, R.H. Thrope, claimed to have seen Mansfield boarding a train at Clarinda the morning after the murders. Some people theorize that Frank Jones hired Mansfield to kill the Moores based on a dispute. Frank and Josiah was bad. Like, apparently, anytime one was walking the street, the other one would cross the road just to avoid each other.
Did you say why they had a beef with each other?
It was because when Josiah used to work for Frank, but he didn't like the way Frank's business was, how he did his stuff. Essentially, he left to start his own business, and he took a huge John Deere account with him, which, given that time, John Deere is like a huge farm equipment business, probably like one of the most biggest ones. So he took that huge client with them.
Okay.
And then some people theorize, well, if Frank didn't do it, maybe he hired someone to do it. Mansfield did end up killing his family, or did kill his family, I think, 2 years later.
And did he kill them with axes?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And do we know why he killed his family?
No, it doesn't say.
But he had an alibi.
But, you know,
For the entire night?
they claimed that he was working in Illinois, but someone did claim that they saw him in Iowa.
If he said he was in Illinois, didn't they check that out?
You would think that they would.
Like work records or something?
Yeah, they did. The work records, as his payroll records, provided him with an airtight alibi, but I guess it's possible someone could have clocked him in, however they did that in 1912.
Are any of these suspects connected to the individual or individuals who have power over the lights going out that night?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
So the next suspect is Henry Lee Moore, and there's no connection to the Moore family. He just happens to have the same last name. Henry did have a troubled upbringing. He lived in Missouri. He developed a bad habit of going to different morgues in St. Louis to view the dead. He also kept a scrapbook of infamous murder cases, with one researcher suggesting that he began this collection as early as 8. He was a suspected serial killer and was convicted of murdering his own mother and grandmother a few months after the Villisca murders. He did use an axe to murder his mother and grandmother. The murder of his family members were similar to the Villisca murders, which is, why he was suspected. It was also theorized that Henry Lee Moore was responsible for the Colorado Springs, Ellsworth, and Paola murders mentioned earlier. So a lot of these suspects that I'm bringing in, different people put their names out, and they think that these people are also connected to these other serial killings that happened in Colorado Springs. So a lot of these different suspects are going to also be accused of those other
Right.
crimes.
It seems like there were a lot of axe murders happening back then, and I don't know if it's because I know they had guns, but I don't know if they're more common or accessible.
Everyone had an axe in their house.
Okay.
It was very, very common for everybody to have an axe. So I think that's probably why it's a powerful weapon. You can do damage with it. Mm-hmm. Everyone has it. So he was released from prison right before all these killings took place. But besides that, we don't have much more information on Moore. He was sentenced to life in prison for killing his mother and grandmother later on, but was released on parole in 1949 and died at 82 in a Salvation Army center in St. Louis. Most don't think it's him because some argue that the spree started while he was in prison and continued while he was out. It's 1912, so things aren't going to be exactly up to date. People started to suspect him, but when they're including more of these axe murders, they're like, well, he was still in jail from a previous thing, and then later on, he went back to prison for killing his mom and grandmother, which was really stupid. He found this girl who I think was underage, and she was like, I can't, like, you don't have a house, you don't have all this stuff. He's like, oh, I'll have a house soon, and he, like, killed his mom and grandmother for that.
He doesn't sound like he's the one for this one. Mm-mm. The other one with the revenge because of the company situation, that one sounds more realistic. Right. It would fit as to who you've gone through right now.
I will say, though, this whole thing ruined Frank Jones's career, like his political career, because his name was just bashed completely. Most people don't really lean towards Frank Jones just because the other ones have a little bit more weight, and I'll get into it. I think Mom's going to like this, the next suspect. That's it for Henry Lee Moore.
I'm looking at the home. It's actually a nice little home. It is, yeah. But the ceilings are low. Mm-hmm. That's why I see why they said the gentleman was not too tall.
Yeah. Oh, and here's the best part, since we're talking about the house. Did you guys know that we can spend a night in this house for $450?
No, thank you.
You can go by yourself.
No, it's supposed to be haunted, and people go in there and they tour this house. I think that would be such a cool little thing for us to do, like a little.
It's not haunted.
I don't know. It's a cool.
You just tour it. You don't even stay there.
No, you can't stay the night, and I think that's so scary. I think that would be cool, but.
The children are really young.
They are. They're really small. They're adorable. They're honestly.
They're so innocent.
Yeah.
I mean,
they did not.
It just blows my mind away.
It really does. So now we're going to move on to probably one of the most popular theories, which is Reverend George Kelly. Kelly was a traveling preacher, originally born in England, who was in Villisca, Iowa, on the night of the murders. And Kelly did have a mental breakdown in adolescence, which is mentioned a lot in the research.
What does that mean, mental breakdown?
Anxiety, depression.
It could be anything. He could have had a panic attack.
I'm just
honestly,
curious
in 1912. I don't know if it was serious.
Like, was it like something like depression or anxiety or panic, or was it like complete break from reality?
Right.
It's
yeah.
Like two different things.
Because if someone nowadays is like, oh, this person had a mental breakdown, you think a little bit worse, but they could have said he had a panic attack. And that was it. It is mentioned a lot. I don't know how much it really applies to this, but he was also accused of peeping on women. So he was a big peeping Tom. He even was seen like peeping on windows like a few days before the murder. He even asked a young woman to pose in the nude for him. I think he put out an ad in a newspaper asking for someone to essentially be like a typist to like type like a secretary. And one of the things once a woman reached out, it was like, you have to do this in the nude. And he just sent really graphic things that even when they were dealing with him, his peepingness, I guess, the judge was like, I'm not reading this letter. It is way too graphic to be heard in a court. So like I said, he was a disgusting peeping Tom. If you're a reverend and you're known as a peeping Tom, why are people still letting you be a reverend?
Well, I don't know if they can take that away from him, can they?
I mean, they should, but... So remember when I asked you guys to remember the Children's Day service at the church earlier? Kelly, taught at that service that night. The Moore family was there and then was later killed. So he was there at that service. And he actually left town the next morning around 5 a.m. on June 10th, the morning of the murders.
That's bright and early.
Was he supposed to leave?
It doesn't say.
He may have one.
I mean, he may. He was a traveling reverend. It definitely could have been he had to leave the next morning. But after the Villisca murders, he immediately left, like I said, he caught a train at 5:20 a.m. I should say the coroner did put their times of death between midnight and 5 a.m. So this is like right at that window. He's hopping on that train. And he even reportedly spoke to an elderly couple there and said, did you hear about those awful axe murders in Villisca? Which they
How
had.
Would he have known?
But that old elderly couple did later kind of change their story, and they said, well, they definitely saw him, and he definitely said that to us, but they couldn't remember the exact date it happened, so it could have been later on. But that was actually very interesting. And he also showed a deep fascination with the case and even wrote to the police and investigators and family members of the dead. So this obviously raised some red flags with police because why is this random traveling reverend be this interested in this case? He even actually, this is interesting, he pretended to be an investigator for Scotland Yard to get access to the crime scene.
That's interesting because they say to be careful of those who try to insert themselves in an investigation.
Right. Yeah. So this is definitely interesting. A private investigator actually wrote back to Kelly asking for any information about the case. He claimed to have heard noises and possibly even saw the murderers.
Kelly did?
Yeah, or saw the murders.
Where was he staying that night to where he said he could have possibly heard noises?
Well, I don't remember exactly, but I do remember him saying he was like walking around. I don't know.
To me, he just sounds like someone who wants attention.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And not someone who really was there because, I don't know, there's just something about his story that just doesn't sit
He seems
with me.
too eager to admit to, to talk about this and stuff like that.
He may be unbalanced, but
Right.
even so, he could have been he was leaving because it was planned for him to leave. I mean, that's something the police could have figured out. Like, was it planned?
Right. They didn't really say. So, 1912, like a lot of things are going to get lost now. But like I said, he did claim that he had he heard noises and possibly saw the murders. But however, like I mentioned, his mental illness did make the investigators question if he was saying, if what he was saying was true or not. He was also diagnosed with schizophrenia, but in the end, the authorities decided not to arrest him because of his height. He was only, get this, 5'2" and about 119 pounds.
Does that make him,
fits.
does he fit?
This is what's interesting. So they were like, authorities were like, he's too small. He couldn't have done all this. But
Is that valid?
then the coroner was the one that was like, I think it was the coroner who was like, the person who did this would have been on the shorter side. So
Right.
What does that mean? Shorter side?
Yeah,
I
like,
mean,
do they have an actual range?
no, but I would assume they would mean something shorter than like 5'8" at least. So
And how tall was Frank?
I'm not sure.
No, it wasn't Frank who did it.
Yeah.
Frank hired someone.
Yeah, if it was Frank, he probably would have hired someone.
Okay.
That's what the theory they're putting out there. But also, Frank's beef was with Josiah, not the kids, and not Lena and Ina. That's the other thing is there's no motive for him to bash everyone, go back and bash everyone's head in addition to Josiah.
That's true, and that's a business.
Right.
So I can see him not being involved. in that.
Right.
The problem is this guy's schizophrenic. So
Reverend Kelly?
yeah, so that doesn't mean he did it. That just means he's not into this society at all. He may think he sees things or hears things. And,
Right. But Frank Jones and Reverend Kelly are pretty separate.
I
okay,
understand that.
Okay.
But I'm just saying that
with-
if Frank did it or hired someone, again, you're right. He is after the father, not the kids.
Right. Right.
Unless he was a really crazy individual. At the same, which I don't think he was.
I mean, he was
the same time, the other guy's schizophrenic. You can't. That doesn't mean he's going to kill either.
Right,
Just
exactly.
because I can see he thought he heard things.
Right. But if anything, I feel like that would make it kind of difficult for him to do all this if he was actively dealing with schizophrenia, because this murder, it seems very organized. And Reverend Kelly doesn't seem like that kind of person.
I definitely don't think he could have been as successful as he was if he was doing this during one of his episodes.
Right, for sure. But we don't know. And I don't even know when he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. It could have been years earlier, years later. You don't know. So I think it actually might have been, if anything, later. But he was right-handed.
Not left-handed. He was supposed to be left-handed.
He did actually follow him after all this when they thought he was a suspect. And they did watch him cut wood left-handed with an axe.
Oh.
But I don't know if he was left-handed, but they...
Or ambidextrous.
Right, but they did see him chop wood with a left hand. And
Okay. And that, I mean, that's with an axe. That's,
Right,
that's
yeah.
pretty important.
Right. What's interesting is the Reverend even sent bloody clothes to a dry cleaners.
How bloody.
But that's the question, is how bloody, we don't know, because...
And when?
How could the dry cleaners not know? Like, I feel like if you get clothes that are soaked, you're going to remember that.
Just wait. He's leaving. What cleaners is he giving his clothes at if he's leaving?
Well, I mean, it sounded like he left and then he came back to be in the investigation because he did get into the crime scene of pretending to be an investigator.
Oh, he did.
So I don't know if the dry cleaners was here, if it was where he first initially with the train. There's a lot of holes in here just because of time. It's been a while, and I don't know how good the investigators were. I mean, they're doing their best with what they had. So, but the coroner and investigators both believe that Kelly was not capable of committing these murders, like I said, due to his size. But 2 years after the murders, in about 1914, Kelly, this is when he was sending the inappropriate messages through the mail. He eventually was sent to St. Elizabeth's Hospital. Later on, investigators did start to wonder if Kelly could be related to the Villisca case. So in 1917, he was officially arrested just for Lena's murder. So it actually took them about 5 years to really start investigating. Well, actually, I think it was a little bit before the 5 years, but it was within 5 years in 1917 that they were finally able to arrest him, but they had their eye on him for a while because of the letters and everything. But it seems like the whole thing in this case just went really slow. And I'm assuming when he was in that St. Elizabeth's Hospital, that might have been when he got diagnosed with his schizophrenia. I'm not sure. He was arrested, just like I said, for just Lena's murder right now. Unfortunately, there was a lot of things wrong with this trial, so we couldn't really get an accurate verdict. Witnesses had trouble remembering things that happened 5 years ago. There was a lack of physical evidence just from everyone trampling through the scene. And the police forced a confession out of Kelly after many long hours of interrogation and even reports of beating it out of him. Kelly even later recanted his confession. And this case first went to trial and ended with one jury hung, and the second trial ended in a mistrial. He later died in 1959 at 80 in a hospital in upstate New York. He did quote-unquote confess, but did he really do it is the question. It was kind of forced out of him.
Did he give a reason for why he did it in his confession?
He said
It was forced, though.
He said that God wanted him to do it, so he did it. Or God told him this is the way it had to be. When he was like, I went upstairs, I killed the Moores, then the Moores' children, and then the Stillingers. But this was also pretty common knowledge, I feel, at this point. I mean, he was in there. He probably could have heard that Josiah and Sarah were killed first. And then when he asked why, he was like, because God told me or something like that.
How do you know the confession was forced?
That's what he said. I wouldn't be surprised.
Kelly said that.
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure if anyone else was saying it was forced.
He was the one that was like, they forced it out of me and I'm going to recant it. Because they probably roughed him up a good amount, knowing that this is Villisca, Iowa. Nothing bad ever happens here. And now they have 8 murders, 8 deaths. Wouldn't be surprised. But that's it for Reverend Kelly. I'm now going to bring us to our last theory, which does have a suspect, but I want to emphasize that this last theory is more of an idea. I mean, we've talked about a serial killer, but this last theory is essentially a serial killer traveling by train. So this theory was actually brought by The Man from the Train, which is a book by Bill James and his daughter, Rachel McCarthy. James discussed this idea and believed that this case was just one of a much larger serial killer that was going around traveling on the train, killing everyone, basically. And they also proposed that Paul Mueller, or Miller, depending on who's talking about it, but Paul Mueller was an immigrant, possibly from Germany, and he was the target of a year-long unsuccessful manhunt, being the suspect in the 1897 murder of a family who had previously employed Mueller as a farmhand in West Brookfield, Massachusetts. Now, with this theory, Mueller would be a serial killer who went on a decade-long killing spree, killing at least 59 people in 14 different incidences. According to this theory, Mueller was responsible for the Colorado Springs and the Paola murders, and they even, in this book, they do also conclude that it's possible this person was related to the Hinterkaifeck murders, because he was from Germany and he could have left Germany as a way to avoid the police and the law there and then started up killing here. What do you guys kind of think of that right off the bat?
Right now, we have blamed 3 or 4 people for the same killings in all these states.
Yeah.
I hope one of them is the right person, but this is really weird. It just shows how the investigation was not done properly, how things were done terrible back then. Of course, science was new with this stuff and all that, but still, to put someone on a trial 5 years later,
Right.
and they didn't even have enough evidence, and people walked all over the place, and it's just unbelievable.
My opinion of this, Paul is this new character's name, right?
Yeah, Paul Mueller.
Paul Mueller. My opinion is, how could it be him if I can see it being potentially him, but this person seemed to know the house because they walked in and went to Josiah's room and then went to everyone else's room.
Yeah.
Now, maybe he just walked in and was able to figure it out. I don't know. But initially I thought the attacker had a sense of the layout of the house beforehand, but maybe not.
It's possible that the person who was watching them on the hay bales could have seen them leave the house for the children's day at the service at the church and gone into the house, looked around, maybe gone in the attic, smoked a few cigarettes, got the layout of the house, and left before they came back. And we don't know. And that's the thing. Going back to this, serial killer theory, it is also would assume that this person has also been connecting, obviously the Colorado Springs one that I mentioned in 1912. There's a Monmouth one in 1911. The Paola, however you pronounce it, in Kansas in 1912. And some even connect this serial killer to the Axemen of New Orleans from 1918 to 1919. And sometimes, and like I mentioned, the Hinterkaifeck effect as well. Now, there's a lot of different crimes that they're kind of connecting to possibly Paul Mueller or just the serial killer in general. According to this serial killer theme, the killer would pick families that lived close to railroad tracks, and it's suspected that this was his way of transportation. With Mueller's suspected crimes, there was sometimes like a sexual motive towards the prepubescent girls, or towards the pubescent girls. Now, it's hard to tell if this was the case in the Villisca murders with Lena because her nightgown was partly lifted, but other than that, there was no other sign, so we don't completely know. That's pretty much all I have based on this. I guess the last theory is just mainly doubling down on the serial killer theory and giving a little bit more in depth about it. And then obviously they proposed the name Paul Mueller as one of the serial killer.
Right now they are thinking that it was a serial killer. Is there anyone in town they think they could have done this?
I don't think they think it was anyone in town, besides Frank Jones. And maybe they thought maybe Sarah's brother, but that checked out. They went through the town, but I think right now their thought process is a serial killer who's hopping on trains and then would hop off, kill, and then get back on.
That's an interesting situation because that still happens today.
Right.
With the train sometimes.
Right.
It's interesting that that's where their whole thought process is.
Yeah, and most of these other cases have some sort of similarities to the Villisca. If they had mirrors in the home, they were covered with clothes or cloths. The victims' faces were covered, windows covered, doors would be locked, the lamp without the chimney and the wick turned down low. So there was a lot of similarities in these cases that I feel like.
Oh, these cases, they also covered their mirrors?
Some of them, if there were mirrors in the house. I know in Paola, however you pronounce it, that the faces were also covered. The murder weapon was left at the scene. Window shades were like pulled down.
That could be a connection, but it could also just be a lot of this was done out of tradition and convenience.
I don't know about covering the head per se, but
or covering the mirrors. How convenient is that going?
No,
around?
that's tradition. She said
the mirrors is, but
convenience is leaving the axe there.
Right.
Why is it they're not finding fingerprints if this guy is transient and they don't even know who he is?
Maybe he has gloves.
I would assume, like, one of the suspects, like, did have their fingerprints on file, and I'm not sure about Paul Mueller because... So it's possible that the fingerprints were on file, so they used gloves knowing that it would get caught.
What about clothes? Did they find any bloody clothes? Because this individual, even hopping on a train, he must have a change of clothes or something.
They didn't find any clothes from the killer there, but it's assumed that he probably just left with the clothes and changed. It's also assumed that he also wore gloves to prevent his fingerprints from showing.
I also think that the police may not have done the best job ever in order to obtain any fingerprints.
I agree. Seeing as he washed his hands or something in the bowl, I would assume he would have taken his gloves off and he possibly could have left a fingerprint that way. But the neighbors and the whole town was just so adamant on getting in that no wonder.
Can you tell me what time of the year it was, the date?
Oh, it's summer, so it's June 9th, the night to the morning of June 10th, because technically it was after 12, so it would be June 10th.
Is there any body of water nearby?
Actually, yeah, so they did bring in some bloodhounds, and they were like famous bloodhounds. I don't know what makes them famous, but they brought in dogs to smell, and it was kind of hard because a whole town already walked through, but they had the dogs smell the axe, and the dogs were following the scent. I guess the dogs stopped at Frank Jones' house and then just looked at it and then kept walking on, which is interesting, but
it could be
anything.
To get the smell.
Right. And then and it tracked their scent to a lake or like a river or a small thing, and then they tried to bring the dogs on the other side to see if the scent picked up, and it didn't. I don't know if that lake, if the person were to walk down the lake, if they would eventually get to the train tracks. I'm not sure on how that works.
I have a theory, and it may be wrong, but I was thinking, that's why I asked if there's a body of water. I'm thinking he may have had gloves, maybe not, whatever. But he walked out bloody, went to the water lake, and took everything out there, and then changed because... First of all, even in darkness, if someone is actually out, they're going to see the blood. If there's a moon, it glitters on you in some ways.
For sure.
I'm assuming he was going straight to the body of water to take off his clothes.
I think that's a very good theory. I think that's very possible because, I mean, how else is this guy going to wipe his whole... It's 1912. He doesn't have wet ones in his pockets. He's got to clean himself somehow before he gets to the train, most likely with like a shower or... going into the water. Yeah, I would 100% agree with that.
It looks like he was able to wash his hands or gloves, whatever he was, in a bowl. And I think that helped him open the doors and not leave fingerprints or smudges or anything, because it doesn't look that they...
Or maybe his shoes, too, so he could walk out. They couldn't find the footprints. Yeah,
because if all that blood is everywhere, he's going to have it on his shoes, too. Which then you begin to think that he's done this before. So he thought this through. And he has a routine. If he's leaving bowls of bloody waters in a few of these serial killings, that means he's done this before.
100%.
And it makes sense because the Villisca murders were not the first in the stream of serial killers, if we're proposing this theory, and it wasn't the last. If we're including possibly the axe murderers in New Orleans is
so either
part of it.
They arrested him at some point on something else, and he was in jail.
Right.
Or he got killed or something.
And a lot of these suspects have already been arrested for something else. Reverend Kelly was eventually arrested because he was sending the inappropriate things to the mail. Henry Lee, I think, was eventually arrested for his mom and grandmother later on. Henry Lee Moore was already in prison beforehand, so he already had his prints. So a lot of these people already had good reasons to avoid having their prints.
I don't think it's Henry Lee. His doesn't.
No, I don't think so either.
His crime does not fit the one here.
Yeah, I agree. Henry Lee he's mostly thrown out, but I still included it, but I would agree that I don't think it was Henry.
And then you have more happening. So if there was axe killings, did they all go in and kill families? The axe killings that we were going through?
So it depends. For the Colorado one, it was 4 members that were killed.
And they were near train tracks?
I think so. It was a man, his wife, and their 18-month-old daughter. They were murdered.
And that one, they thought it was just also probably serial killer, so they obviously didn't have anyone for that. And with an axe?
So these are all like with axes too. And then the Monmouth, it was William Dawson, his wife, and their 13-year-old daughter. They were all just bludgeoned with, I think that this one, it was a heavy pipe in their beds. So it's a little bit different, but I think that one is still considered part of it because the pipe was found at the crime scene, so it was similar, and they just picked up the murder weapon there. Paola, however you pronounce that, do not know, was actually just like 6 days before the Moore family was killed. And it was a man, his wife, and they were found dead in their beds. So it's different each time. And then obviously the Axemen in New Orleans, that's a whole nother case, which I don't really know if they're connected.
That's interesting. A lot of times when you see true crime cases on like Dateline or 2020, there's always a reason for people being attacked, and it's usually somebody they know. I wonder if there's as many cases now where random people are attacked in the middle of the night for no reason. Like that's more Criminal Minds that I see a lot, kind of episodes.
And that's not true either. I mean, that's Criminal Minds. It's not like real facts.
Are you saying this case feels more like
Criminal Minds?
See, it feels more like they were probably attacked by a random individual, which you see that a lot in Criminal Minds. People getting attacked by serial killers.
Right.
Obviously, they're picking them out for a reason, but they don't know the individuals they're personally attacking a lot of times.
Yeah, no, for sure. I would say kind of like the same thing too. What's their motive? How would this person have known? If their motive was Lena, they weren't supposed to stay there that night. Was it Lena? But then why was Josiah overkill?
I think he was overkilled just because he's a man and he wanted to make sure he was dead. And if there's anything in his background that makes him sensitive to fathers, he would probably take it out on him. It's just an interesting case because there's a lot of pieces that don't make sense, and they will never make sense. I don't think they have any evidence, right?
What do you mean?
Anything that we could take DNA from now.
No. Maybe the axe had not everyone picked it up.
The axe, even right now, if you look, people are holding it. So that's not even going to be evidence.
Also, I do want to just really clarify. I think he sent a bloody shirt to a drugstore to get cleaned. I don't know if it was like a drugstore. I think it was a drugstore, not a dry cleaners, but that could have been their former dry cleaners back then.
I think this individual could have just been a sick person. One thing I wonder about is if he did have some sort of sexual interest in Lena, why did he not also have it in Kathy or her younger sister? What was her younger sister's name?
Ina.
It could have been that Lena was that right age, and maybe the other two were too young. They were close though in age, and I would have expected him to at least, even if they weren't his type necessarily sexually, I would have expected him to at least pull their pants down and look to see if that had what he was into.
If Lena was already going to fill whatever sick, twisted fantasies he had, maybe he just needed her for that.
That could be.
Also, Catherine's closer in age than Lena, than Ina was. Yeah, so maybe it was Ina was too little. Maybe there was no sexual. People also say that there was blood. I should probably mention there was blood on Lena's underwear, kind of like he used it to wipe his hands, the gloves, and he threw it underneath. So it could be maybe he just needed to wipe something and he grabbed that and he wasn't thinking. Maybe he was.
I don't know.
That's really odd to pull an
It is.
underwear
It's
to
a
wipe.
weird article of clothing when you have bed sheets next to you.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why people like to go to Paul Mueller, because for cases that they're bringing in when they're talking about Mueller as a suspect, a lot of them, but not all of them, but some of them have like a sexual motive directed towards like some pubescent girl. So that's why I guess the Villisca is included with this list, and possibly why it was Lena, because she might have been pubescent and Ina might have been too young.
It's just really strange.
It is. This whole thing is like very confusing because Lena is 12, so she's definitely a little bit older.
You kill a whole family to be able to do something with a little girl and then you can't even succeed?
for a little girl that's not even supposed to be there. It's hard to get in the heads of these
individuals
because they're so sick and twisted. It's hard to understand where they're coming from.
But it just seemed that for it to happen this way, like all the stars had to align a certain way for Lena to be there, for them to come from church, for the lights not to be on. Everything had to be perfect. Yeah. And it did. Yeah. And it happened. So sometimes you have to take a step back and say, was it someone in the town?
Right. That's why Kelly was a suspect too, is because he was in the town at least a few days beforehand.
Well, you mean the Reverend?
But investigators did say that they don't think that Reverend Kelly could have been able to do this because, yes, he could swing an axe and everything, but he was still 119 pounds at 5'2". Like, I think they thought the person was short, but I think they're thinking that Reverend was just a little bit too small.
Yeah, he could have been small. He didn't have to be 5'2".
Right. I mean, he could have been
5'5",
whatever.
Yeah, 119 is pretty thin.
That's all I got.
At the same time, I just want to say, if he strikes them and it hits them so that they never wake up, he doesn't need to be that big or that strong.
True,
I mean, they're unconscious because they're sleeping. You hit them with an axe and completely incapacitate them from waking up. It's not as hard as trying to hit them while they're awake.
I think that what they're trying to say is it would take a lot of force for Reverend Kelly to do that hit.
So it would also mean that Reverend Kelly finished his sermon. Mm-hmm. Everybody left. He closed shop and somehow ran over and stayed in the barn and sat on the hay and watched them before they went to bed, which they probably went to bed pretty fast.
Right. It could have been that maybe Reverend, if they're going off of Reverend, this theory that maybe he was already in the hay a night before, or then that some part of the day he was watching them, and then he went back. But
there's a lot we don't know about the Reverend, like how long he was there.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Was he doing rounds, or was he just came in, did his sermon, and left the next day? Was he supposed to leave the next day? There's so much we don't know.
Exactly.
And that's, you can't clear anyone up because there's so much we just don't know.
Exactly. And given this time period, it's also so hard to tell a motive because, like I said, at first people think that Josiah is the motive, and then some people are like, possibly it's Lena, but I also wonder if maybe his motive wasn't necessarily one person or another. It was just killing a whole family.
Correct. It could have been, especially if he's serial killer and that's his fun thing.
And then it's weird that he makes food and just leaves it there too.
It's kind of like the Miyazawa family where he had his ice cream.
Right, exactly. And he didn't even eat the food.
No, he did in the Miyazawa.
No, but in this case he didn't.
Yeah, in this case. Supposedly, right?
Supposedly, yeah.
I mean, what is it with these individuals? They go into a house, they do what they do, and then they sit down, eat, and enjoy themselves, and then leave.
And then it's with the mirrors. So is he having remorse? But if he's having remorse, how is he being able to just chillax in that house for so long while all the family members are dead? The youngest was a 5-year-old. So there's a little 5-year-old dead in that bed upstairs. But if it's ritualistic,
it's probably more ritualistic
or tradition, something like that. I don't know. The windows, I get it, maybe as a way to keep them like, hey, make sure no one looks in, but still, it's all very, very weird. Because he used the blunt end, and then he went back and he used the blunt end again, and then that's how the sharp, marks came up, and then he slipped, and then he started using the sharp end, so it's very weird. Where your guys' theory about who did it, I'm thinking right now that you guys no to Reverend Kelly, no to Henry Lee Moore, and probably no to Frank Jones, because that's kind of where I am too. So I was wondering if you guys are.
I honestly I'm not sure. I don't know what to believe.
I also don't know what to believe. However, I would need more details about the case and the individuals. Where were they? Was there proof? And because it was back then and things were done a little different, we don't have all that. Unfortunately, I think it's a case that will never be solved unless there's some DNA somewhere, some police station had it, or a museum has it or something that's never been touched. And I don't even know if they would put things in baggies and someone decides to do DNA testing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't think there's going to be a closure to this story.
No, I agree. I would say maybe I feel like probably no to like Henry Lee Moore, but I feel like with all these other people, I would probably still need a little bit more, because although Reverend Kelly seems like he's not, I still don't know for sure, because there's still parts about even him where I'm like, I don't know, he does kind of work. But I will say that I do think this is a serial killer in some way, traveling on this train, and I think that's very likely. And if that's Paul Mueller, Reverend Kelly, or just someone else, I don't know. But I think it's very likely that it could have been like a serial killer traveling by train. What do you guys think?
I think it could be likely, but again, I wouldn't take out that it could have been also someone else.
Yeah.
That it may be even in the town that they didn't think
Villisca.
about looking into, right?
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible that the person could also just not be listed here today. I think that's very, very possible.
Yeah, I think it could be somebody we talked about. I think it could be somebody from the town, like Mom just said. I still don't have a strong feeling it's necessarily any of the people we talked about or somebody we didn't talk about. I honestly just don't know, because I feel like I don't have enough information to make a judgment.
I feel like this case definitely leaves me questioning things and very confused and just wanting more answers. Fortunately, that's all we have for the Villisca axe murders. So I want to thank Mom and Sophia for coming and listening to my story today, but also want to thank everyone. I want to thank the listeners for tuning in this week. We hope you stay in the Eerie Side. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Be safe.